Hi everyone. Security is a crucial aspect of every web application, and the good news is Rails is really good for an application with high security standards. And in my talk today, I will highlight the recent security-related changes in Rails. In the second half, I will also explain why I think Rails is a good choice for security. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Greg, and I became a Rails developer about 14 years ago when I saw the famous Build a Blog in 15 Minutes video. And then a few years after, I took a contract work with a security consultancy, and they made me interested in security. I started to learn more about it. And a few years after, I became a certified penetration tester, and I started to do penetration testing and Rails development part-time. And because I love to break software, but I also love to build software. And recently, I stopped doing penetration testing, and I will do bug bounty hunting and Rails development side by side. Now, let's move on to the more important stuff, the actual talk. So, the recent security changes in Rails. First one I want to talk about was actually introduced in Rails 7.2. It is a dependable integration. Rails 7.2 ships with a generated dependable configuration file for GitHub Actions. If you don't know what Dependable is, it's a tool to alert you about outdated and insecure dependencies. And so why is that important? You know, when a CV is published for a gem, usually automated attacks are launched within a day. So if you don't upgrade your applications, you might be hacked. And I will have a few examples. Rails is pretty secure. The whole ecosystem is really good with security, but still we have a few CVs published quite often. Action tags had a CVE published, an XSS issue published recently. Flex had 3 XSS issues recently. One of them was found by me, actually. And Sidekick UI also had an XSS published recently. So we are quite secure, but there are still issues. And if you use Dependable, you will be alerted about these issues quite quickly. You can upgrade your applications and stay safe. If you use an older version of Rails, then you can just copy the CI file. It's pretty simple and be secure. Or if you are not on GitHub, you can use Bundle Audit, which is a really nice tool. I highly recommend that one to check it out. The next change is Breakman. It's pretty similar change with Breakman. It's now in a default CI file with Rails. And if you don't know what Breakman is, it's a static code analyzer. It helps you to find security issues. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to find every issue, but it's going to find quite a few issues. It also finds false positives, but you can just ignore those on your CI. It's pretty simple with a configuration file. And basically, that's it about Breakman. The next change is a really important one. Now Rails has built-in rate limiting. And why is rate limiting important? I don't know if any of you heard about credential stuffing. It's a pretty common attack these days because there are a bunch of leaked password databases, and it's a very easy to pull off attack scenario. Basically, they just try all of the reused passwords against applications and get access to accounts. I have a few examples. 23andMe had a big data breach a few months ago. They were actually not so nice about it. They were blaming the users. Why do you reuse passwords? But that's a good point. But still, as a developer, you should try to prevent any security issues. General Motors also suffered a quite big credential stuffing attack recently. And also a few months ago, Roku had more than 500,000 accounts hacked because of a leaked passwords database was used in a credential stuffing attack against them. So the new rate limiter is really simple to use. All you need to do, single line, add it to your authentication controller. You can set the 2 parameters to how many requests you want to allow, and the within will control the time period. It also acts like a before action callback, so you can use only or except to control which actions you want to apply the rate limiting to. And a few days ago, something got merged into Rails, which will come out in 8. That will allow you to have multiple rate limiting in the same controller for separate methods. The requests by default are grouped by the IP address. You can change this if you want. It's really simple. You set the byte to a co-label, and then you can change it to whatever you want. Also, the way it handles rate limiting by default, it's a 429 too-many request response, but you can customize this. You can redirect to whatever page, display a nice flash message, like in the example below. And the storage, it's actually really nice. It doesn't have any dependencies. You don't need Redis. You can use your database. Actually, you can use whatever is your cache store or whatever is a cache store compatible storage. For instance, if you want to change it, you can just set the store to Redis URL or a solid cache URL. The next change is also a very interesting one. Rails 8 is coming built with an authentication generator. This is a quite often asked feature. I think even when I started to use Rails, people were complaining about why don't we have built-in authentication. Well, authentication is very custom for applications, so it's difficult to have an official solution. But now you have a generator which gives you the basics, and then you can build up on that. I'm not going to get into all the details, but I will touch on the important parts. Generator is really simple to run. You just run bin rails generate authentication, and then you can see what files are going to be generated. It is a simple authentication system, but simple is good. It gives less room for errors, less attack surface for potential attackers. It has a password-based login. It has an email-based password reset flow, and it's built on top of a very nice Rails helpers, which has secure password, find by password, reset token, and authenticated by, and the new Rails security-related helpers. It has a rate limiting configuration out of the box. What it doesn't have is signups. It doesn't have password validation, and it doesn't have multi-factor authentication. But the good news, it's easy to implement all of those yourself. You can use the built-in helpers. They will handle cryptography, which is usually the biggest pet peeve of security. And the next change is not really a code change. It's an update to the Rails maintenance policy. I will just read you the important section, which I think is one of the most important part. Minor releases will receive security fixes for 2 years after the first release in its series. For example, if a theoretical 1.1.0 is released on January 1st, 2023, it will receive security fixes until January 1st, 2025. After that, it will reach its end of life. When a release series reaches its end of life, it's your own responsibility to deal with bugs and security issues. We may provide backports of the fixes and merge them. However, there will be no new versions released. We recommend to point your application at the stable branch using Git. If you are not comfortable maintaining your own versions, you should upgrade to a supported version. So the bottom line, if you want to keep your application secure, keep them updated. And the next one is a small change, but it gives me an opportunity to showcase a very important feature of Rails. CVV and CVC is added to the default parameters of the parameter filter in Rails. I hope everybody knows that there is a built-in parameter filter in Rails, and it helps you to filter sensitive information out of your logs. And CVV and CVC is added now. That's not the important part. The important part is to use this tool. If you store anything sensitive, you have authentication tokens, API tokens, whatnot, put the parameter into these filters because it's going to be helpful to make sure you don't leak any information in your logs. So now we get to the second part of my talk. Why choose Rails for security? Well, there is a tool for pretty much everything. I don't know how many of you ever completed a security questionnaire. Can I see some hands? Have you ever completed a security questionnaire? Good. Some of the things will be familiar to you. One of the questions is usually, do you encrypt data at rest? Which is not an easy thing to do if you are not using Rails. With Rails, there's active record encryption. It does the heavy lifting. It handles cryptography, which is very complicated. I'm terrible at it. And it's very easy to use. It uses strong encryption. And you can use between deterministic or non-deterministic encryption based on if you want to be able to search your data. It also supports key rotation by default, which is a very important thing to be able to do. And next question on security questionnaires is usually, do you use strong cryptography? Well, Rails has built-in strong cryptography. Session cookies, everything, solid cache, everything is encrypted with strong built-in encryption. You don't need to even think about it. In case you need secure tokens, there are beautiful new helpers with active record secure token. It just helps you to create password reset tokens, API keys, set an expiry in a single line of code. Finding records by those tokens is very, very simple. If you need to handle credential stuffing or brute force attacks, as I mentioned, now there is a built-in rate limiter, but you might want something more advanced. You are still in good hands because we have rack attack. Rack attack is a very simple to use gem. It's blocking on the rack level, so it might be more performant than the built-in rate limiter. It also has a lot more features, so I really recommend everybody to check that one out. But if you have a small new application, go with the built-in one. You will get to a point when you might want to migrate, but the built-in rate limiter at least raises awareness of that you need rate limiting. Next thing, which I also touched about, you shouldn't store any sensitive information in your logs because those might get leaked. Someone finds a local file inclusion vulnerability in your application. They can't really do much with it, but if they can read your logs and your logs contain secrets, then you are in a big trouble. You need to audit what your developers have access to production. This used to be a very big problem and very difficult. On the web, it's easy. You can use Papertrail and a bunch of alternatives. It logs changes to your active record models, and you can see who touched what. The important part is you should store your audit logs in a write-only table. Otherwise, someone at your company can just update the data. They do something which they shouldn't, and they can just delete the audit logs later, and then you are not going to have a track record. The more difficult part is the Rails console, because once you are in a production console, you have access to everything, and nobody could know in the past what you are accessing to. But 37 Signals created two new gems about 2-3 years ago, I think now. One is called Console 1984, and the other one is called Audits 1984. They are really nice. They keep audit logs, but the same thing applies to this one as well. You should make sure you store your audit logs in a table which cannot be edited or updated. Do you need to worry about vulnerable dependencies? With Rails, not really, because we have Dependable and we have also bundle audit. Very simple to set it up, easy, quick win. Actually, how many of you guys use Dependable or bundle audit in your application? Amazing. You are really good, guys. I love this. Content security policy. A content security policy can help to mitigate XSS attacks. And as you saw, the recent examples were all XSS issues. So if you have a good content security policy, you might have an XSS, but it's not exploitable. So with Rails, it's actually really simple to create one. As you can see in the example, put this into your initializer and customize it to your own needs. If you need to be able to execute inline JavaScript, then you can permit that. You can permit a few things, but usually it's good to lock down everything as much as you can. Open redirects. Anybody knows what open redirects are? Few people. Good. Good thing in Rails, you don't even need to know what it is because there is built-in protection now. You need to, it's on by default. It raises an exception. You can nicely rescue that exception and handle it in your own custom way. You might want to just get a confirmation from the users whether they want to visit that link, or you can just block it and say we don't allow redirects to third parties. Or you can have a whitelist of third parties you want to redirect to if you have an OAuth flow and you need that. So to sum it up, I think Rails is one of the best option for a high security standard application. Because we have tools for everything. We have a great community. People usually care about security. Now we talk more about security in the community. Just look at the sponsors of the company we have of this conference. We have multiple security companies sponsoring, and it's just the future is bright in my opinion. And that's my talk basically. One more thing I would like you to ask. You can follow me on Twitter. That's not really important. The more important thing is I am the co-editor of this newsletter called This Week in Rails. It is a community-run newsletter sharing the changes in Rails every weekly. So if you are interested to learn about all the new features in Rails, please subscribe and you will get it on every Friday. And if you have any questions, I think we have time for questions. So you can ask now or find me later. I'm very approachable, happy to talk about anything security or anything else if you want to. So anybody has any questions?
What's one of your main vulnerabilities you find when you're pen testing Rails?
It's authorization issues, because that's the most difficult to prevent. It's always custom. You can't have any automation because it's depending on your own rules. And very important thing about authorization is to use a whitelist approach. So don't allow everything and then lock down what you don't want to permit. Block down everything and then whitelist what people can access. Because if you have an it's much better to have somebody complaining about not being able to access something they should than if somebody accesses something they shouldn't. Does it answer your question? Any other questions? Anyone? Yeah?
So on a similar topic, role-based authentication, are there any community gems out there that offer like role-based authentication?
Pandit, I think, is one of the most popular one.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. So the question was if there are any good gems to do role-based authorization. Pandit, I think, is the most well-known one, but you can just use plain Ruby objects. It's not rocket science, to be honest. So, and also, don't be scared of security. It's not rocket science. You just need to put in the time. Any other questions? Anyone? No?
I got one. Sorry. Do you have one? What's your opinion on bug bounties?
So the question is, what's my opinion of bug bounties? I think you should convince your company to have a bug bounty program, even if you don't go on the platforms like HackerOne, because they charge half one of your kidneys, unfortunately. Unfortunately, they're very expensive. But just put up a page on your website, just a security page, and tell people if you find a bug, email to this address. We'll thank you. You don't even need to pay. Like I report issues, I'm not expecting to be paid. I report it because I want the internet to be a safer place. If I get money for it, of course, it's good. But if I don't, I move on. I do the next thing. So I think everybody should have even if it's not like a proper bug bounty program, but a semi-official one, because it helps. Well, that depends on your. Oh, the question is if I have any recommendation to store encryption keys. It really depends on your deployment flow. How do you deploy? You can have third-party key management. The keys are pulled in during your deployment flow from a vault, and I think that's the best way. But it depends on how you deploy your application. There was someone else there.
How do you get started, like actually working on bug bounties?
The question is, how did I get started working on bug bounties? I reported a few bugs because I found them in applications I use, and then I realized people paid for this, and it's much. I think for me it's better than penetration testing. Pen testing is great. I love the job, but there is scoping calls, follow-up meetings. It's guys, we don't like meetings, right? And there are a bunch of administration meetings involved. With the bug bounty program, I can just find a bug, write a report, and get paid. No calls, no meetings. Much better for me. Any other questions?
What's your opinion on the current state of passkeys?
What's my opinion on the current state of passkeys? Well, DHH wrote a good blog post about it, and I 100% agree with him. I think it's good in theory, but in practice, we are not there. They are great for second factor, two-factor authentication. Use a YubiKey or something. But for the rest, for like just authentication, I think we are not there yet. Yep.
You mentioned Rails 8 and authentication that will is there anything there for like something there for SSO?
The question is if there is anything in Rails for SSL. Well, I didn't mention that because I think we have that for a decade at least. You can just
SSL. Single sign-on.
Oh, single sign-on. Sorry, I thought SSL. Sorry. SSO, no. You need to use OmniAuth or one of the gems for that. Anybody, any other questions?
Is there any plan in the future to integrate more tightly with third-party vendors like Okta or something, right?
Well, I think you should keep Okta authentication. Don't outsource it. Okta had a breach recently, and it's out of your hands. You can only control what you own, and you should own your authentication. You should also own your user base. Don't let someone else have access to them, in my opinion.
Like for employee-facing only, you think that's still
For what? Sorry.
for employee-facing only?
I don't like Okta. I think even then, use your own. I don't like the company. I think they don't stand for security. They just want to make money, and they are not privacy conscious at all. Anybody else? Any questions? That's a really good question. As David mentioned, don't be scared of the server. You can learn that. It's not super complicated. Lock down all the ports. Make sure that the deployment flow is secure, which Kamal will handle for you. And there's a very, very small attack vector, unless you do something complex and complicated, but then you probably have the team to handle that. If you have a small, simple Rails set deploying with Kamal to a VPS, just lock down SSH, use key-based authentication, and then you are fine. Nothing else is required. Anybody else? The question is, what's the most common mistakes outside of authorization? Surprisingly, it's XSS. Even though XSS is really well handled in Rails, like in ERB, everything is escaped by default, but still people are making mistakes. It's so easy, unfortunately. That's the thing also. It's easy to make mistakes. I also make mistakes. Not a big deal. Learn from it, don't do it next time, and that's it. I will answer your question in person. Thanks, everyone.